Okay, everybody, let's get started. We've got a few more people to join us, but I know everybody is busy. This is either lunchtime in the East or breakfast time in the West, depending on where you're at in between. I would like to get started. Before I introduce Dr. Cantor, I would like to say you can ask questions throughout the webinar. On the little right-hand button there, you see questions, and send them to me. I will answer the questions at the end of Dr. Cantor's presentation. And this will be about how do people see me. As a note, we will send out another notice. We have a really exciting webinar also that's coming up in May. So look for those details soon. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Laura Cantor. Laura, we're very fortunate. She is a much sought after guest lecturer and speaker, and has also been an adjunct professor in psychology and human movement courses. She is a registered physiologist who specializes in performance psychology in business, sports, and life. Laura also uses the principles of positive psychology in her work to improve on successful outcome to her clients. Laura works with professional and elite amateur athletes, C-suite business executives, and professionals and elite performing artists. As well as being a performance psychologist, Laura has over 12 years experience working with professional elite amateur athletes as an exercise physiologist and athletic development trainer in the US. Without much further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Laura Cantor. Laura?
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Appreciate that introduction. And thank you all for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm excited to be here. And hopefully the information I share with you is going to help you improve upon your leadership skills, as well as help you in your everyday interactions with your team and organization. And really, ideally, I want you to ask yourself, as we're going throughout this presentation, how can this information help me, and how can it be used to help the people around me? So let's go ahead and get started. Now, before I dive into the main topic here, let's see. So the main topic being how do people see me? I wanted to start today's webinar by asking all of you a couple of questions. And I feel this is going to aid to our discussion. So in the chat, please feel free to write down some responses here to what are your biggest worries or challenges within healthcare today. So just take a moment and write something down in the chat there and think about what is really challenging you. All right, I don't see anything in the chat yet, but I know some ideas that came to my mind, and feel free to, as I said, put some answers in the chat. So some potential concerns might be loss of reimbursement, or maybe even going back to the old system of healthcare, or a different kind of system moving forward. So think about some of these challenges that you're seeing in your day-to-day life as we're going through the presentation. Now, how prepared are you to face and meet these challenges? And really, this gets to the heart of how do people see me. So again, thinking about those challenges, and feel free to type your answers. This question I bring up, it's kind of rhetoric at the moment, but how prepared am I to face and meet these challenges? So as we start to go through today's topic, where do I begin? How do I actually kick it off in terms of how do people see me? Well, frankly, that really comes down to how you see yourself. Now, if we consider for a moment where our ancestors have come from, their fate really depended enormously on what others thought of them. Their survival, their chances for survival really increased when they were protected by a group. Okay, now I'm sure some of you are thinking that we don't really need to worry about saber-toothed tiger these days, and that's fair enough. But our current saber-toothed tiger might be organizational change. right? It might be implementing a new strategy. It might be just the everyday politics of our work environment. So today, stress really is our modern saber-toothed tiger. And the big question we need to ask right away when considering how do people see me is to ask, how accurately do I see myself? So we cannot accurately predict how others judge us if we cannot be critical in knowing ourselves. And I'm sure all of you, somewhere along the road, probably heard the immortal words here of Socrates, know thyself. And Socrates said, people make themselves appear ridiculous when they're trying to know about ambiguous things before they know themselves. And his student Plato took it a step further and stated that knowing thyself would have a greater outcome when trying to understand the nature of human beings. Most of the people I work with in terms of healthcare, the executives I work with on a daily one-to-one basis, they're going through career transitions or some sort of large organizational change. And everyone I talk with, they're quick to explain why they feel a certain way, why they act as they do, and they have readily formed beliefs about themselves and the world around them. But no matter what, I always ask that question, how well do you really know yourself? Oh, trying to go to the next slide here, bear with me. All right. So, humans, our sense of self is really at the center of our world. And I'm sure many of us have seen a rom-com film or two out there that emphasizes that we are, or we should be, at the center stage of the play that we call life. And though it's a fabulous cliche, there is some truth to it. But unfortunately, most humans overestimate the extent to which others' behaviors are aimed directly towards us. And, sometimes we do feel responsible for events, even if we only had a minor part to play. So when we judge someone else, specifically for their performance or their behavior, we actually spontaneously compare it with our own. Think back. Have you ever had a situation where you thought to yourself, I don't think I would have behaved the same way as, let's say, Joe, right? In that particular situation, that would not have been my response. And so therefore, if that comparison is negative, so a consequence then is that we typically then perceive that person's performance to be negative. And, the funny thing is we actually tend to do this subconsciously. So we may not even be aware that we're doing it. And we have this fancy term in psychology called psychological distance. Psychology or psychological distance, we're really good at giving other people advice, but we may not be as good at applying that same advice to ourselves. So quite simply, we make better decisions when we're able to step back and have perspective. And whether that's judging Joe's behavior or even our own, stepping outside of our current situation and imagining ourselves as an advisor, we might consider, how would you advise somebody who is asking you this question, how do people see me? Well, how do you want to be seen? So be your own consultant for a moment. That question, how do you want people to see you, really leads us to a fundamental understanding of an aspect of knowing thyself, which is self-confidence. Now, within traditional sport and performance psychology, we have a very simple definition for confidence, for self-confidence. It's that belief that you can successfully perform a desired behavior. So, in many circumstances, hopefully some of you have been watching the Olympics, it can arouse positive emotions, facilitate concentration. It can help us by affecting our goal-setting strategies. It can increase our efforts. In sport, we call focus on game strategies, but think about the different strategies you use in your day-to-day life. And then also, it can help us maintain momentum. Now, while confidence is more than just a belief that you can perform a successful behavior, there's actually many different intricate parts to it. So in order to be truly confident and find this optimal level of self-confidence, you have to be confident in your ability to execute the physical skills. So do I even know what I'm supposed to be doing in this situation? Confidence about your ability to use psychological skills. Do you use appropriate body language when you're speaking to people? Do you engage in positive self-talk or de-stress techniques? We need confidence in our perceptual skills. So that's our decision-making and our adaptability. Now in sport, we say confidence in one's level of physical fitness and training. Fair enough, most of you are probably not running marathons every day, but I'm sure that sometimes it actually feels like you are. So even as executives or even in the corporate world, we still need a level of physical fitness to make sure that we have good psychological and perceptual skills. And then finally, we need confidence in our learning potential and ability to improve on skill. So again, kind of going back to that first one in terms of executing physical skills, do we have the right tools and resources to help us with our problem solving and our adaptability? So now you can see this very simple definition of having a belief and a trust in our own potential has now become more complicated, because that belief and trust now incorporates our capacity to overcome obstacles and achieve goals, our belief and trust in our own preparation and readiness, our focus, the choices we make. Are we still pursuing a meaningful mission? And then actually, do we have confidence in the people around us with whom we work and play? And so I like to use that word work and play. I know sometimes it may not always translate off the field, but do you actually have confidence in your current team members? And then when you go home, do you have confidence in your family and friends that they're there to support you? So given all these dynamics associated with confidence, your individual confidence level will rise and fall dependent on those quality of the different experiences that you have. So the bottom line, all of this depends on your ability to self-analyze and critically examine your performance. And it's what I call having a good, better, how perspective. What was good? What could be better? And how am I going to make those corrections? So all of this ties back into, how do people see me? Am I presenting myself in a way I want people to perceive me? Am I over or underutilizing certain strengths that might alter someone's perception? Now, if you're worried about how people see you, you can look towards your immediate team. You know, when I was preparing for this presentation, it just happened to be apropos the other week that the PBS NewsHour had this interesting clip about an orchestra. And a group of healthcare executives and doctors went to visit this orchestra to see if they could learn about team building and working together. And the orchestra itself was made up of freelance musicians. Most had only just met for the very first time that day, and they had just met that conductor. They had never worked with him before. They all rehearsed for about an hour, and then afterwards they were able to play a symphony flawlessly. And everybody in that room just kind of sat there puzzled in terms of, well, how could you do that? So think about that from a hospital's perspective or your own organization's perspective at the moment. What if you're a surgeon? You go into the operating room, and maybe it's a team you've never worked with before. You know, that scenario, it can actually create an opportunity for a bit of chaos to occur. I don't know about you, but I certainly wouldn't want to be that patient on that day. But people in the OR, they may not always know the names or the roles of the team members they're working with. And in fact, I've actually been in an OR when a surgeon got so frustrated, he actually threw operating equipment across the room. He was so frustrated that the supporting staff didn't understand how he liked to have things done. There was a particular suture that he liked to work with, and the team, not knowing this, did not prepare prior for the surgery. And so again, that chaos ensued. What about you? Think of a time maybe when you were new to an organization or new to your current supporting team? Was there a potential for chaos? Now, getting back to that main purpose of the story, how can this orchestra play together for 1 hour and then all of a sudden be flawless? Well, the very first thing that orchestra did is they tuned up. So in other words, they actually communicated with each other through music to figure out what the other one was saying. What if that surgeon I told you about, what if he had taken 5 or maybe 10 or maybe 15 minutes prior to the surgery and tuned up with the supporting surgical staff? Hey team, this is our first time working together. Let's talk about how we're going to do this operation. Now, I know telling this story to some doctors or some of the executives here, you might say, well, that sounds a little silly. But I think throwing medical instruments across the operating room is technically against maybe some OSHA rules and maybe some policies within the hospital itself. So if he had just taken those initial 5 to 15 minutes to tune up with the group and make sure everybody was playing on the same note, we wouldn't have had to worry that he didn't have the sutures that he liked to work with. Now, my favorite comment within this PBS NewsHour clip came from actually one of the surgeons. And the doctor said that typically after I leave a surgery, I tell my supporting staff, take care of the patient. And frankly, I just laughed. And the reason why I thought it was funny, while I was still in physical therapy, this was a very common phrase that surgeons would say to us. Take care of the patient. I have friends that are nurses, and they say they've heard very similar responses as well from doctors. Well, the obvious answer is, of course. I mean, obviously, we're going to take care of the patient. But what that doctor didn't do when they were saying take care of the patient, they didn't tell me anything about that surgery. Was there a different technique? Does this person need to be managed differently? So frankly, taking care of the patient really doesn't help that supportive staff and for everybody to work as a team. And unfortunately, the reality of most situations, the staff's going to get an earful the next day when they learn about those specific orders that the doctor wanted but failed to communicate. Now, what about you? Have you ever done this with your team? You know, working with athletes and coaches, I hear all the time, get out there and do a good job, or with executives, go out there, make change happen. I love these slogans, these pep talks that you would hear. But have you truly communicated what you want your team to know, therefore giving everyone the confidence they need to be successful? So thinking about what I just said in terms of this particular scenario with the orchestra, how might people see you? And I can tell you right now, the staff who didn't know the surgeon with the surgery that I was in, they walked away feeling like this guy was awful, to put it G-rated and mildly. Many said they never wanted to work with him again. And some complaints were issued. But the funny thing is, he's actually a very nice person. He's very energetic, he's positive. People are amazed that he doesn't drink coffee since he's so peppy and has so much energy before 7 a.m. And I'm sure if you asked him, how do you think people saw you after that surgery? He would be very upset to find out that everyone thought he was a pretty nasty guy. And that was all based on just one performance. So being able to accurately predict, how do I want people to see me? That really comes from having the ability of self-awareness. You know, it's funny, one of my biggest pet peeves as a psychologist is whenever people can rattle off their Myers-Briggs initials. And typically when I'm meeting people for the first time, you know, that's what they do. I'm an INFJ, I'm the counselor, or ESTJ, I'm the supervisor. And I typically think to myself, great, that's wonderful. You just remembered some initials. But then the one thing I consistently hear after people rattle off those initials, well, that's just who I am. And I'm not really in a place where I can change. So all of these supposed personality tests, they're really measuring your behaviors. They're predicting who we are based on how you say you behave in certain situations. They're traits that we tend to exude based on so-called personality and what these tests are actually looking for. But really, they're looking at behaviors, and we have full control over our behaviors. For example, if you're an extrovert, you can choose to be more quiet when the occasion calls for it. And every person on the line right now, if you're an introvert, you know all too well about forcing yourself to be more extroverted in certain situations. The bottom line, our personality isn't fixed. And in fact, many studies have shown that there's changes in our personalities throughout our lifetime. So if you took that Myers-Briggs or the DISC or any one of these surveys several years ago, that may not actually be your predisposition today. And hopefully, part of the point of today, ideally we trend towards character development over the lifespan. Now, part of that character development is having self-awareness. And self-awareness is the capacity to stand apart from ourselves and be able to examine our thinking, our intentions, our behavior, and then ultimately that effect that it has on the world around us. So as we learn to recognize and accept our relationship to this large and complex world around us, we can begin to accept more responsibility for consequences of those thoughts, of those feelings, and then subsequent behaviors. So we can become better at critically analyzing how we want people to see us. What did I do that was good? What could have been better? And then how am I going to make these changes for future success? And what's interesting, when you actually read about successful leaders who are authentic in their leadership style, they actually strive for self-awareness when it comes to improving upon their relationships. So forget about the Myers-Briggs profile or the DISC or any of those other psychoanalytic tests that you've taken, and really focus on this question. What are your strengths? Take a moment, write them down. Again, feel free to share them in the chat. What are your strengths? What are you good at? What are you great at? Now, once you have a few down, how many did you actually write? Funny enough, awareness is really key. That's the first step when we're trying to figure out what we do good. Only about a third of people can actually name their own trait-like strengths. Typically, we're actually better at detailing what we're bad at. So again, take a moment, think about who you want to be and what are those strengths. Our culture, we tend to focus on weakness. From grade school to high school to university to our workplace, management is constantly pointing out what we do wrong. And look, I admit, we do need to know what we do wrong, that it does have a certain level of importance, but it is only important up to a point. And what I'm about to say next has kind of become my very long mantra at this point. I say it all the time, but the main focus for individuals and organizations in the past has been getting rid of weaknesses rather than building upon primary strengths. And yet the past 20 years of research has told us that focusing on strengths is a far more effective strategy for fostering creativity, productivity, and well-being. We need to be able to name our strengths. Naming gives them merit, But research also shows us that when our goals and our activities align with our strengths, we are more likely to have that motivation to stick to our goals. Now, on this particular slide, I just happened to list the values and action character strengths from the VIA Institute. I just wanted to give you some words that you could use, maybe highlight some strengths that you probably didn't even think of. Frankly, you can certainly substitute the Strengths Finder 2.0 or any other strengths outlet there. But really, this is just here to help you visualize various strengths of character. So I've just mentioned how we tend to focus on weaknesses. Well, let me give you another example or metaphor to kind of hit home this idea of why strength building is so important. And we call this the sailboat metaphor. So you can see that nice sailboat up there at the top. Now imagine you're sailing on a boat. Maybe you're in the Côte d'Azur or Great Barrier Reef. This one is obviously a team yacht here, so maybe not the best one, but imagine you're just kind of relaxing on the boat. And all of a sudden there's a leak. A leak in the hull of the ship. Well, we might certainly call this a weakness. And the rule of thumb is to generally keep an eye on the leak and attend to it in direct proportion in terms of how it troubles you. So managing the hull on the boat, it's going to keep you afloat. It's going to keep you from sinking. So it is important to address the weakness before that metaphorical leak gets out of control. However, are you actually going anywhere when you're minding that leak? So if the strengths, by contrast, are the sails of the sailboat, what are they responsible for? Now the sails, they're actually responsible for pushing the vessel forward. It goes towards your desired destination, your goals. And so, like real sails of a ship, our strengths need to be adjusted so that they are used in the correct proportions to maximize their success. So therefore, strengths and weaknesses act like two separate processes with two separate outcomes. And managing weaknesses keep you afloat, but developing our strengths will actually push us forward towards our goal and our destination. Now, the funny thing about our strengths, and the reason why it can be so hard to name them, or even come up with 5, for example, sometimes these top strengths, these signature strengths, they actually come so naturally to us that we're not even aware that we use them. They're our go-to strengths, if you will. And so therefore, our self-awareness for using these strengths isn't as profound as when we have to work hard to cultivate strengths that we don't use often. So the image that you see now on the screen, this is what the VIA Institute calls their circumplexus strengths. Now, I'm happy to answer questions about the circumflex and go into more detail if you want to message me or ask questions for the end. But really, in general, we can see here that all these little dots, all the blue and red dots, they appear actually in the exact same place for everybody. And we see that they're divided into either a mind or a heart category on the horizontal line. On the horizontal line. And then we have interpersonal and intrapersonal on the vertical line. Now, the highest strength for an individual would appear in red. As an example, this particular person has strengths of kindness, appreciation of beauty and excellence, curiosity, love of learning, and perseverance. You know, it's funny, out of the 225 plus healthcare executives I've worked with over the years, I can still count on one hand the number of people who have leadership in their top 5. Now, it's always a source of confusion and discussion in our coaching sessions. But let me ask you guys another question. And it's the same one I asked them. What is your personal definition of leadership? Again, write it down. Or even bullet point. But what is your personal definition? Now, the VIA Institute, their definition of leadership means that you excel at encouraging a group to get things done while still preserving harmony within that group, making sure everyone feels included, and you do a good job at organizing activities and seeing that they happen. What do you think? Is that similar to your definition? Encouraging a group to get things done, preserving harmony of a group, making sure everyone feels included, working to get a job done, and organizing activities. It's just one definition. Of course, there's hundreds of definitions of leadership. But how this definition aligns with other definitions really boils down to when you look at the rest of the strengths on this page. No matter your definition, we all, for example, have all 24 of these strengths. And as a leader, there's going to be times where you have to be maybe more prudent, more creative, more hopeful, gracious, fair. There are times when we have to be open to using strengths that are not in our top 5 in order to be successful at various behaviors like leadership. So the self strengths have nothing to do with being selfish, as you can see as far as the interpersonal and intrapersonal side. They just tend to be a little bit more intrinsic. For example, I can't be curious for anybody else, right? I can't be brave for you. And, there's no ideal profile. We should all strive to cultivate strengths in each quadrant. And if you happen to see 2 strengths that are very close together on the graph, typically we say that they're more likely to be compatible or co-occur. While strengths that are far apart, we like to say that they tend to be traded off. So meaning it's less likely that a person will habitually show that same strength while they're showcasing one that's further apart. So an example of this one might be, say, kindness and prudence. When people are sometimes being prudent, it doesn't always mean that we're coming across just kind to others. Now, certainly it doesn't mean that you cannot showcase kindness and prudence together. It's just it's not a strength that we typically cultivate at the same time. Now let's take it a step farther. Let's see what it means to be a strengths-based organization. I'm sure all of you have heard this phrase. Ever since Gallup Strength Finder came out, being strengths-based has certainly become part of our language and our lexicon. And many organizations, they love to use that term in their mission statements now. But what does it mean to be a strengths-based organization? I mean, first of all, who's going to admit that they're not, right? Who's going to say, not us? But being strengths-based means that you are deliberate in assessing, identifying, and acknowledging strengths, as well as assisting in the development of strengths to broaden and build up those that already exist. Now, all of you must possess some amazing strengths, otherwise you wouldn't be where you are today. And how do you know that the words you wrote down are in fact your strengths? Typically we tend to emulate people we admire, maybe people from our past. Either you've had leaders that you want to emulate, or certainly we've all had that one boss or two who we don't want to emulate. But beyond that, when was the last time you actually sat down and really thought about your leadership style, your strengths, and how you want people to see you? And of course, the most common thing that people are always told in order to discover your strengths is to go and ask all the other people around you. I know what you're thinking. Great, I've signed up for a webinar and all she's going to do is tell me to take a straw poll of my staff and family and see what my strengths are. Now, good thing this thing's free. But actually, I'm not going to tell you to do that. Frankly, who we ask may or may not even be useful information to us. You can ask your spouse or significant other, but they may not see you from the office. You can ask people in the office, but if they are your subordinate, are they really giving you an honest answer? Even as a psychologist, part of my role is to challenge the people I work with. However, I have certainly worked with people that felt like I was less challenging them and more of an attack. Definitely not my intention, but when we're open and vulnerable, we don't see it as an attack. It's when we're rigid and we're not willing to be open that we feel it's aggressive versus, say, a challenge. As I said early on in the presentation, the problem is people bring their own experiences into their analysis of you, just as you do to them. And if we recently had a bad experience with someone, that's going to influence this analysis. And when heard someone say, we are prisoners of our own experiences. And I thought that was quite apropos. So, asking our family, asking our friends, what are my strengths? It may actually not be helpful at all. What we do know is that people who are more comfortable in their own skin connect with others easier. If we focus too much on what others think of us, it can certainly be linked to other underlying issues. Go back to confidence. But the best way to understand how do people see me is, again, to ask yourself, how do I want to be seen? Now, I've been asking this question consistently throughout the presentation. And I know some of you might be asking, well, if I'm preparing, if I'm actually saying to myself, how do I want people to see me? Is this pre-planning really authentic? Am I being myself? And the answer is yes. Pre-planning prior to an event is about performance enhancement. So how do you want to be perceived? That, again, is going to depend on your situation. How do you adapt to your environment? For example, how do you want people to see you in just a monthly team meeting? Or maybe even a quick team huddle? Feel free to write in the chat, write down your answers. Maybe, I don't know, it's just a team meeting, a team huddle. Maybe it's more about being stable, reliable, easygoing, but having a purpose. What about a board meeting or a town hall? How is that different? Sure, you might want to still be seen as stable, but what are other characteristics that you want people to pick up on versus if you were just in a normal team meeting? And worst case scenario, what if there's some sort of an emergency situation? How do you want people to see you then? So despite this idea of pre-planning, you are still your authentic self, but now you're tapping into the strengths that you may not use as often. So maybe not those top strengths, or perhaps you're using those top strengths in a new and a different way. You're flexing those behavioral characteristic muscles, if you will. Now, once you work out your self-concept, this idea of self-awareness, then you can look at your team and reflect on their potential. Now you can become a strengths finder of other people. So what are the strengths of your team? Write those down. What about each individual member? Are you missing any strengths? Is there something you see as important to your team, and maybe it's just not there? Or again, are we doing this overusing or underusing of a strength? For example, I had been at a conference with the VIA Institute, and I was speaking to this chiropractor. He owned quite a large chiropractic firm, about 80 people. And he had heard about the VIA, and he wanted to take it just for fun, just for team building purposes. And yet when everybody got their individual scores back, their individual strengths and responses back, they all actually kind of laughed because every single person had very similar top five, if not the same. And so they realized, you know what, as friendly and amazing of a place it is for us to work here, we all get along, are we actually being critical, though, when finding people to be on our team to maybe pick up in terms of those areas where some of us might slack. And he gave the example of, they were all really good at coming up with new and innovative ways to grow their business, and yet nobody ever implemented them. So while creativity was there in Mounds, he didn't have anybody who was that self-regulator, that person who could actually go out there and make it happen. Now, throughout this presentation, I've used the term authentic, and I'm sure you've even heard the term authentic leadership. And so what do we mean when we say authentic leadership? When I talk to executives, the ones that I work with, we talk about change management strategies. Again, what are you currently dealing with, whether it's in the industry or your own current organization? And one thing I constantly hear, and I wish it would stop, and I don't know who said it, but I love it when people say, it's not personal, it's just business. And to me, that's nonsense. It really needs to be taken out of our lexicon. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever been fired from a job? I'm sure that felt kind of personal. Have you ever had to make a really big life change, like move across country for a job? Or have you, frankly, just messed up on a job before? Again, I'm sure it felt kind of personal. So guess what? Change, especially big changes that happen within our organizations, people are going to feel apprehensive. They're going to feel insecure. And guess what? It feels pretty personal to them. So as a result, people, they want genuine, real, and what Australians call true blue leaders that they can trust for their leadership. They want people to be honest. They want them to be authentic. Now, authentic leadership, it is a fairly new genre within leadership research. It's definitely a subsector of transformational leadership. But again, it's focusing on that leader who is genuine and real. And there are 4 key distinct components of this type of leadership. Number 1, self-awareness. 2, internalized moral perspective. 3, balanced processing. And 4, relational transparency. So think of the past. Think of those leaders who you admired. What qualities did they exhibit? And were any of them the same as authentic leadership qualities? These are a couple figures to help give you an overview or an understanding of authentic leadership. Now, authentic leaders, they understand their own values and behavior towards others. The research that the author on the second figure there, figure 2, what he said is that authentic leaders, they have a true north, meaning they have a clear idea of who they are, where they're going, and what the right thing to do. When tested in difficult situations, authentic leaders do not compromise these values. Actually, they use these situations to strengthen their values. So bottom line, one of the themes, one of the ideas I want you to walk away with from this presentation all comes from a theory I was developing when I was still doing my master's degree in Australia, hence the True Blue reference there. Spent almost 6 years down under, so I still have a few colloquialisms that I say now and then. But this theory I came up with when I was still in school, I call it my mechanic theory. So I'm going to ask you the question I ask athletes and executives alike. Why do you take your car into the shop? Now, of course, I immediately get similar answers. We take our cars into the shop for that routine, that oil change, right? Routine maintenance. Maybe sometimes something's broken, right? And it needs to be fixed. But there's always another reason that most people leave out. There are times when we actually want to soup up our engine, rev it up, make it fitter, faster, and even stronger. So just like our cars, we have to tune our oil from time to time. And frankly, we forget to do that. Unless something's broken, we forget we can actually take our metaphoric car in to make it better. We get so wrapped up in the minutia of our day, that to-do list, right? The mouse vision, that 3-foot view of everything that we're doing. And we forget to take a step back. We forget to have this eagle vision, right? The 10,000-foot view. Again, in psychology, we use big fancy terms like vertical coherence to explain this phenomenon. But it's really just that ability to set goals, and then while you monitor them, be able to go back and forth between this idea of eagle vision and mouse vision. But when was the last time you thought about who you are? When was the last time you asked, how do I want people to perceive me? And when was the last time you asked yourself, what are my goals? What is it that I want to do? Working with people who go through transition, one thing they say to me often is that, I didn't even think about networking when I still had a job. And yet, when we are in transition, all we think about is networking. Every business magazine, outplacement group, job search, they tell us 80% of job seekers say they find jobs through networking. And it's interesting because authentic leaders, they develop strong relationships and connections with others. Right? That was one of the 4 distinct components. A few years ago, I went up to the ACAG conference to meet with a bunch of clients, put a face to the name, since we typically talk on the phone a lot. Some people Skype, but usually it's by phone. And I had one client come to me and very excited, very happy, and they had maybe 10 business cards, 20 business cards. That's great. What can you tell me about each person that you got a business card from? And they couldn't do it. Did you really connect with that person? Did you get to a point where you feel comfortable sharing your story, and vice versa? Chances are, if they didn't feel that level of connection, they're not going to remember you. They didn't develop that trust, that closeness. And it can be developed even at a place like the ACAG conference. I know it's terribly big and sometimes can be difficult to have meaningful conversations, but you can. And then those are the people that will help you along your journey. All of this comes back to having an understanding of who you are, knowing your attributes, knowing the difference between that public persona and private persona, and having an understanding of how others see you. If you actually look at the figure on the right, it looks kind of similar to that circumplex that we saw earlier. And so it's saying authentic leaders need passion, compassion, consistency, connectedness, and then have value behaviors. So what strengths do you think you need in order to cultivate connectedness, consistency, or passion for what you're doing? Now I'm going to bring you back to one of my original questions here. How prepared are you to face and meet the challenges? And which strengths are you going to use? I start here because when we're going through big events, this is the best time to reflect on where you've been, where you are, and where you'd like to go. It's true of transition, but it's also true when we are on the job and facing major changes to the industry. And authentic leaders, they cultivate passion. Their work elicits passion. It helps to keep that work fresh for them. And if we have a fresh perspective, we can be innovative. We can help motivate others. We can leverage more energy to help us in terms of our commitment. Again, you're more able to adapt. You can pivot when you see big changes come. And this all comes back to being authentic and cultivating passion. Now, before I end and open it up to some questions here, I wanted to just put a little inspirational slide up. I'm not sure if some of you know who Amy Purdy is. She first became on everybody's radar in the 2014 Olympics, the Paralympics. She was a bronze medalist in snowboarding. I think she's been on Dancing with the Stars. She's been on The Amazing Race. She has a pretty amazing TED Talk out there, so you can certainly Google her TED Talk. But I really loved this quote. Right, our biggest disability is up here, referring to the mind. This is where we limit ourselves. If someone would have told me that I'd lose my legs at the age of 19, I would have thought there was absolutely no way I would be able to handle it. But then it happened and I realized that there is so much more to live for. My life is not my legs. Again, I just always thought that was such an amazing, inspirational quote, and it can be applicable in so many different areas of our lives. So that about wraps it up for the main discussion today. But as you can see, we've actually talked about a ton of things. We've talked about self-awareness, authentic leadership, confidence, strengths development. All of these are aspects of self-management, self-leadership, and strengths-based development. And each one of these is paramount to how people see you. Now, I typically talk about how to influence others in a separate discussion. So how do you take everything that we've been learning and speaking about today and actually apply it to influencing others, developing presence, getting that buy-in and engagement, and of course, team building and cohesion. But for now, I'll leave it here. I appreciate, again, this opportunity to talk to everybody, and I'm going to turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Dr. Cantor. Very, very informational. I know all of you have certainly appreciated that. Dr. Cantor, if you go to the next slide, you all pretty much know how to reach out to us. If you need to ask any questions, call or email. There's Dr. Cantor. There's my information. And I don't think at this time we have, give me 2 seconds, any questions. Let's see. I don't see any questions. If you have any questions, you can type them in now. Oh, wait a minute. I think I do see one. Give me a second. And this is, assuming that my competencies and skills keep pace, what is needed in leadership, evolving into accountable care, etc.? Dr. Cantor.
That's a great question. So assuming that you have all the competencies up to date, again, I think it also goes back to, do you know the strengths of your team? Do you have that supporting team around you? And can you easily rely on each other? You know, right now, healthcare, there's so many changes that are going to be happening over the next several years. And unless we feel that we are confident in the people around us, it's going to be very challenging then to change people's minds. Unfortunately, Michael, you might know this statistic too, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard that most C-suite leaders are only, in their current role for about 3 to 5 years.
That is true.
I mean, that's the life of an NFL player. And I don't think you guys get hit as hard every day. So again, unless you have a team that's around you and willing to use their strengths and supporting your strengths, it's not going to jive well together. And unfortunately, I think sometimes as leaders, we forget to go that extra mile and find strengths in other people and then see how we can match them up for true behavior change.
This is from Laura. What 360 leadership assessments do you recommend? As an FYI to everybody, we do talent assessments here at the Wetridge Group. both pre-hire, post-hire, and while you're in the job. So if you need further information regarding assessments, please contact me. And if you have a specific question for Laura on that, please reach out to her at Cantor & Associates. Any other questions I can help answer for anybody? Okay, great. We ended up 2 minutes before the hour, which we promised. Thank you all very much. If you have any information or any questions, my email is mpbritton@wettrichgroup.com. Again, thank you for participating. Dr. Cantor, we all thank you very much. It was very, very, very informational. And we'll certainly talk to y'all down the line. Thank you again. Bye-bye now.